So, as you can see, this is one of the rare opportunities that we have more women on stage than men. Sorry, John. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for sharing your view with us. You raised highly interesting points. Not only you, also the other speakers we've heard earlier. And I was really glad to hear that there is indeed a common sense that we do need a much better protection of data than we have now. But the question is, and Alexandra mentioned it before, the question is how can we manage to deal with data and new technologies in a more responsible, ethical way? What does it mean if we talk about corporate digital responsibility? How do companies deal with it? And I would like to put the first question to John Frank. Microsoft, as a major global player, is very much engaged in pushing this issue forward. John, and I was astonished to read that you have set up voluntarily a self-commitment in regard to corporate digital responsibility. So what are your main values? What are you focusing on?
We've been very focused on ensuring that artificial intelligence technologies, as they're deployed across a wide range of applications and scenarios, are used in ways that are responsible, that are human-centric, and that are positive for society. Technology doesn't always have to be positive. It can be used for bad things as well as good things. And so we've been, as we launch more and more artificial intelligence services for our customers, we want to make sure that we've thought about the right way that we prepare it, sort of an ethical considerations in the front end, but also what's the right way for customers to use it so that they're using it ethically. And so, in particular, the scenario that we've focused on the most is facial recognition technology. As an application that is potentially very useful, and it has some maturity, but it also has significant potential for being used in ways that are anti-democratic, repressive, and really harmful to social values that we hold dear. And so what we focused on is, we want legislation, regulation, that goes beyond GDPR, that will regulate how facial recognition technologies are produced as well as used.
Okay, I think we can rely on this example and talk a little bit more about this, but let me ask first of all, Valentina, Daiber, Telefónica is also keen on pushing the issue of corporate digital responsibility forward. Did you implement something in your company about this issue?
Yes, of course. I mean, the key of everything from our perspective is only companies who drive digitization in a human-centric way, these are the ones who will be in the end successful and who will gain customers' trust. And I think Sarah has described that very well in her opening speech. I mean, there are different ways how to manage the digital change. You can try brute force. You can disrupt and innovate in a certain market segment and push ahead without consideration of potential concerns of consumers and without consideration of potential concerns of regulators and politicians. Or you can do it in a different manner. You can do it in the way that you look at potential concerns and concentrate on what is important to customers. And the thesis behind that is that digitization will only succeed in the long term if there is a broad social acceptance and for all those new technologies and the associated far-reaching changes in the society and the economy. And I personally, and also as a board member of a large telecoms company, I strongly believe that the second one is the right way. And consequently, we have put corporate digital responsible very, very high in our agenda. So we have implemented that in our strategy. Of course, it's part of our corporate responsibility strategy and what we call the responsible business plan. And that means in the end that everything that we are doing is measured whether this is, as I said in the beginning, really human-centric and in the end serves the customer and not the technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about what policy can do. Viviane Reding, you have spearheaded many important legislative endeavors during your career, and one of your landmark proposals was the GDPR. So if you look at the EU now, what should be the next steps, the next action points for the EU to do regarding digital ethics?
Well, first I would like to say we are not operating in a neutral space. We have heard this morning, and it's very true, that in the United States everything is allowed what is not forbidden, that in China everything is allowed, and that in Europe we try to put rules. Now you only can put rules if people recognize that those rules are implemented. And one of the reasons why I did not make a directive out of GDPR, but a regulation, to be widely applied in the same manner on the whole of the continent with one rule and for all companies operating on our continent was justly that. Now, we can speak about how it has in the end been implemented in a nitty-gritty way by a lot of exceptions and okay. But what is important is that it is an ethical basis of a future digital society. Now we can always do things better in the future. And I had tried it also before with self-regulation and with companies taking over. Now I'm very happy that you chose 2 companies which are behaving well to sit on this platform here. But we have heard exactly the same speech in January in München by Sheryl Sandberg. Okay? So I have my strong doubts if corporations decide by themselves what is ethical. And I have heard from your intervention that you are going the first step, but you would very much like that politics takes over and does something solid. And to make a long story very short, I personally believe that if Europe would strongly and with rules which are controlled in their implementation, go for a human-centric digital development, it would be a real commercial advantage. And as we have seen with GDPR, it needed some time before they understood. But slowly and slowly, worldwide GDPR develops into a world gold standard. So it needs time, but we are the only continent in the world which can start it. There's nobody else who can start that. And so I hope very much that the Commission, the new one, because the old, quote-unquote, one under Jean-Claude Juncker has ordered this ethical guidelines by an expert group, which in April this year has published those. Now those have to be discussed with companies and then implemented in rules and implemented in reality, and that goes only with regulation.
Yeah, let me ask you, Sarah. You have been involved in many processes in the EU. Do you think the EU is really prepared for such a huge challenge?
I do think that with the ethical AI guidelines, yeah, they have put out a few hygiene factors that absolutely need to be in place for any kind of human-centric system. They re-recognize the importance of privacy, and they add to that some other values like transparency and control and all of that, which I summarized in my talk a little bit as, here are 5 things you should be doing. The problem is when you say human-centric, what is it that you mean by human-centric? And the problem I see currently is that the EU Commission for a long time and Parliament has been lobbied by companies who are now telling them, here are these 5 principles, and then we have checked the box, right? And if the politicians believe that this is the case, and then they can go on to the next subject, they're wrong. They're completely wrong, because human-centric system design means that you have to build for the good, that you have to get rid of efficiency, speed, and profit for its own sake, that you have to motivate your teams to build a better world. And this sounds a little bit naive, yeah, almost, yeah? But I think only positive motivation of this kind that is also driven out of the companies because they can better compete on values than on the X functionality and usability of their systems. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what we have to do.
Okay, I would like to understand a bit more, John, about what you is driving actually at Microsoft concerning this issue. You wrote an article, and I would like to quote one sentence. You said, "We need new transparency laws requiring technology companies that develop such services to disclose their capabilities and limitations, what they can do, and perhaps even more importantly, what they cannot do." I mean, this actually means you admit that the products you are developing are not 100% secure. There might be faults in it, but you put it on the market and just try it while, you know, letting consumers try it. Is this the regular way? And you're saying we must change this?
I think you've misunderstood what the statement relates to. In facial recognition technologies, you can have false positives and false negatives. That's just, and you can, when you're operating the system, you can optimize to minimize one or the other. It's a function very much of the data sets that you're using, the initial, if you will, the reference template of the original face, as well as the probe templates that come in later for the match. So there's a bunch of considerations. Sometimes you have bigger photos, sometimes you have smaller photos, but the point is to tell people what are the limitations of the system so they can use it in the proper context and avoid using it in improper context. For example, police in the United States are deploying body-worn cameras. And we've advised that the photographs from body-worn cameras are not reliable enough to produce good matches in our facial recognition software. But we do have a report we call the transparency note, which sets out kind of the positives and negatives so that people who are coming to the technology can understand, you know, what it can be used for well and what it shouldn't be used for. And it's a start. We think that we can give information to users so that they can deploy these things in ways that they'll get good results and avoid situations where they may do bad things.
Okay, I understood. But one of the major questions behind all this is actually how would you define something like corporate digital responsibility? If you ask for regulation, and Telefónica as well is requiring politicians to do something, what are we actually talking about? I mean, should we first of all define what corporate digital responsibility means according to what you said? Do you have a definition? Do you have one?
I don't have a neat definition, but it's ensuring, I think you have to assume that you're going to take responsibility for the products that you create and the change and impact they have on the world. And if you're not willing to take responsibility for that, you shouldn't be shipping the product.
Yes, Sarah.
Yeah, so I have a question for you. At the IEEE, which is the largest engineering organization, we are developing a standard called P7000, and you will be getting that next year. And what it will tell you is the following. First of all, it will tell you, do you have an organizational context that allows engineers to have the time, the budget, and the autonomy to think about ethics, privacy, transparency, but also many other values. That's for one thing. And then it tells them to go through, let's say, put a roadmap up that is not function-driven, but that is value-driven. A roadmap that may contain 50 or 60 different ways to build values into systems. And then, and that's the crucial point, to run through risk assessments for many of those values, which is time and cost intensive, in order to make sure that specifications are corresponding to values. Now, this is in a nutshell the engineering standard that's coming. And I'm wondering, when you hear that, how do you see that? Is that responsible innovation, or would you be ready to do that?
Certainly, we've devoted a huge amount of time to, esoterically we call it the Ether Committee, which is our AI ethics committee, which has been in the first few years reviewing every major project to give feedback and to say, look, if it can be used this way but not this way, or a better solution is over here. And so we do have an ethics committee of very senior researchers to give guidance on that. We have an Office of AI Ethics, which is going beyond principles, proposed legislation. Now, I don't know the precise modalities of values, but we want our technology used in ways that reflect important social values.
How does this sound to you, Viviane?
This sounds very interesting, but I'm thinking about the myriad of companies who just do the contrary. And how do we manage, we as a society, to entrust our people, our citizens, your consumers, with a certainty that the products they buy, the systems they buy, everything they utilize has by design. Yeah, I know what I'm speaking about because I had tried privacy by design, and it was a complete failure because not yet understood by the companies. Today, if you could sell something with privacy by design, you will make a huge revenue because people will trust that what they buy is sound. But so that this happen, you need a control organization. You cannot leave it to companies alone because not everybody is Microsoft with such a mentality, you see. So, and that is where the responsibility of politics comes in. Now, I agree with you that it sounds easy, but it isn't. So I wait with great interest your engineering by design ethical elements, because that would be basic also for helping politicians to go to the right direction. Because very often you see GDPR, consent, well thought, but what was happening with it in the end? So I think that the next commission will be forced to change the rules so that they are applied in such a way that consent is meaningful. Because now it's true, consent sometimes brings about the destruction of privacy. So you see, we are also doing by learning, learning by doing. You could say it both ways, because nobody has done those things before, and nobody is going to do it on other continents. So, knowing that we are not going to have the 100% purity at the beginning, I advise to go for it and then to come very quickly to the reform of the first action, because there will be inbuilt misconceptions or things which cannot work. And in this way, we will have to change the way we do European regulations, because we always did regulations for the eternity. And that is not true anymore, because rule-making is slower than technology making. And so we have to adapt that we can change our rules and adapt them to the changing technologies. That would be a good advice to give to political leaders for the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about what countries can do in order to speed up the rule-making of the EU. There is an interesting initiative going on in Germany, an initiative by the Federal Ministry of Justice. It was just recently launched, I think, and many big companies of Germany joined this initiative towards more CDR. For example, Deutsche Telekom, Miele, Otto, SAP, Zeit Online, and Telefónica as well. So what's behind this initiative, and does it really can push things forward?
Absolutely, I'm convinced. I mean, maybe before I tell you more about that initiative, I come back to the question you raised before. So I wanted to make the point that I'm not sure whether regulation is really the right way everywhere. Because if I come back to what I said in the beginning, I mean, my strongest belief is that in the end, what counts and what is important is the trust of the customer. Only with customers' trust we are able to develop our business models successfully. And if I believe that, I have to follow that way and to walk the talk. And that's why we decided to put corporate digital responsibility into the DNA of the company, what I call the responsible business plan. And if I do so, I strongly believe that has advantages compared to regulation, because of course you are much quicker and you believe in what you are doing. And I mean, of course, GDPR, I raised it already yesterday during the dinner. I think this is really a great example where Europe now serves as a role model globally, and we have to build on that and to continue. If you leave room for companies for self-regulation, you can always be quicker and reach a broader scope. Let me say it that way. And that's exactly the idea also of that initiative that you mentioned. It has been initiated by the German Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection early last year already, and it has been exactly the companies that you said that started to learn from each other, and that's why we call it a learning partnership. So it's a kind of public-private learning partnership. And what we are doing there is to try to develop responsible practices and concrete examples for sustainable digitization. And we try to develop guidelines for that responsible, sustainable digitization, and we are working on concrete examples which come from the experience of each company. And you're right, this has been launched or published some months ago. And many other companies have now joined the initiative, and I think this is exactly the way how it also can work, because it creates a kind of competition between companies. So once some of them are starting and others are following, and that's the way how it can work.
Mm-hmm. I would like to pick up again one argument you gave, Viviane. You talked about the role Europe can play as a role model, actually. But I think one major question, and I would like to put it to you, John, is don't we fall behind when we are taking care about ethical standards and discussing all this, and it takes time to get regulations, while countries such as China, on the other side, are not taking care about anything and just pushing their products on the market?
I think it's more important to get it right than necessarily get it quick. And we're going to be seeing artificial intelligence technologies across a whole range of applications and topics. Not everyone requires further regulation. GDPR provides great horizontal regulation for much of it. But we look at the key aspects, and so that's why we call it facial recognition technology. Let's learn by taking something relatively narrow, where we've got some experience and we think we can get there, and let's try regulating one topic and have the discussions and figure out how much of it should be community-wide regulation, how much of it should be pushed down so there's more a standards body kind of rules being created. But so I don't think it's an unmanageable problem. I think it can be done well. We do need agility. We need to be able to revise these laws more frequently because technology is going to evolve. But if we think about the right framework, Europe is in the lead. It should stay in the lead. But I'll note that just last week, the Chinese Ministry of Education announced they're going to regulate use of facial recognition technology in classrooms. 4 states in the United States are considering legislation now on regulating facial recognition. So China and the US are focused on these issues, and so there is an agility of moving forward with regulation as well.
Okay, Viviane, but again, I would like to ask again, because I think it's one of the key questions. Is there a risk if we are concentrating on absolutely relevant issues as ethics, but on the economic, from the economic standpoint, isn't it a risk concerning if we see our competitors running forward?
I agree with what you said. Speed is, on the long run, maybe not the magic solution. But let me come back to the topic. I think it's a good idea to start with one subtopic of the general topic. Well, the generalities you can speak about during years, but to solve a very specific application of AI and put the borders to it will be important. Now, I think that the moment of truth will come with health. You know that in GDPR we were very stringent on the way you as company can use health data. And the American companies try to make a breakthrough in Europe in this moment in order to lobby hospitals into giving out the health data of their patients. Now that is impossible by GDPR, and we will see how strong our regulation is if we manage to stop this, but put the alternatives on the table in the same way. Clarify, for instance, what can be done in research. It is foreseen in the rules, but it has to be clarified. So there are many elements which we see which are questioned by technological developments. And we have to be precise on this. Imagine you cannot, as a patient anymore, entrust your doctor, entrust your hospital. That in Europe is a no-go. It might be a possibility in the States, I don't know. But in Europe, it simply couldn't be. So it will be important to take one or the other very delicate and element which people understand. Health, they do understand. Face recognition, they do understand. While developing in the same time the more larger ethical grounds. But face recognition and health data are a very ethical problem.
Okay, Sarah, do you agree health could be very crucial issue when we look from the global perspective?
Yeah, I don't want to focus on the health particularly. I wanted to go back to the question of regulation. And I want to give an example. We have ISO 9000 for quality. And there are a lot of technologies that have to today go through an ISO 9000 process. Yeah? For example, drones. Drones are not allowed to fly above urban areas if they have not gone through the quality standard process to prove that their drones don't fall on people's heads. And this is by law. And what I think where the regulator can come in and should be coming in is to say, companies who want to launch their products, their technical products in Europe, need to go through some kind of ethical certification. Just as there is quality, there can be ethics, and only when they have passed that test, they are allowed to be launched in the European market. Now, this is a very bold approach, but I think that must be the direction, because the question is bigger than just health data or facial recognition.
Valentina?
I just wanted to make a general point, because I wanted to say that I completely disagree with the thesis that speed is not of the essence. I think speed is absolutely of the essence. I mean, we discuss now since years in Europe why we are lagging behind the US and the China economy. And the only thing that we have to do is that we now have to act. I mean, everything is in place. We have regulated relevant parts of the industry. We know that we need what we call an investment-friendly regulation. We have more or less defined what that means. We just have to implement it. We know that we have a more or less common set of values in Europe, and we should build on that. And my deepest wish is that we start just acting, and I'm deeply convinced that speed is absolutely of essence. That's the point that I wanted to make.
Yeah, but where do you put the discussion about ethics then? This would need time, does it?
Yeah, again, I think also there many things are already in place, and you are right. I mean, there is the time now to agree on those common ethical policies and aspects, to agree on a common set of values for Europe, and then implement it.
Okay, so Viviane, we just have 1:30 minutes. The last word is for you. Give us hope, give us courage. What is it? Optimism and courage for the last statement, and tell us why should we be confident that the EU is on a good way to regulate the matter of ethics?
Because we started it, we know somehow where we are going. We do not yet know if we do a general approach or what you propose, a more specific approach. I think you can do both, and I also agree with the last speaker that we should do it quickly. And because you can take 10 years to discuss it over, and you still will make mistakes. So we will make mistakes, but we should do. And I wish the next Commission well. And I hope that the next Parliament, who is helping the Commission, will go to the right direction. And I really wish something, that the Member States, who normally are the problem which we have in order to go further, do not start with the nitty-gritty again and leave us to do our job.
So that was a wonderful last statement. Thank you so much, Viviane, John, Sarah, and Valentina for being with us discussing this, and Alexander is taking over now. Thank you so much.